Hey guys, this is Tolly and welcome to Let's Build a JRPG part 14, although this may be more like part 14 or 13 and a half, we'll see. It's been a little bit since we've done any streaming, and I thought today would be a good day to get back to the JRPG stuff. I've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy VII Remake and Divinity, and I've just got some neat ideas for like what we could potentially do for a simple JRPG combat system. Before we can get there, we really need to stop and take a look at the refactors that need to be done because they're kind of hampering our ability to build forward. So today this video is going to be a little different because rather than showing you me try and figure out how to refactor this stuff, I think part of the reason some of this code needs to be refactored is because I'm rambling on stream and not really thinking some of this stuff through. Today, I kind of spent about an hour and a half or so just refactoring some of the code we've written, and I'm going to walk you through at the start of this video kind of some of the changes we've made and some of the kind of major implications. So the big things that we are looking at doing up next are mainly trying to get a team manager, an encounter design data manager, and like stats coming in from design data. So a lot of the pieces of getting a combat system kind of prototyped out, I'm really trying to build around design data importing, and we can't really do this very well until this like combat character manager is figured out. So all that being said, let's take a look at how I refactored the combat character manager, what it was, what the problems were, and how we kind of fixed those to give us a lot more freedom moving forward. So taking a look at the code changes I've made in Perforce, we're kind of going to review why we need to make these changes, what changes I made, and how it's going to better impact things. First off, the reason that I was really like, okay, we have to make, at the end of the last stream on part 13, I was like, I really need to change combat character manager to not have this monsters in combat and characters in combat. It was just feeling super clunky to me. We had kind of called out that we probably need to break it down into just one array for the units, and so that monsters and characters aren't in two separate arrays, and then to refactor this part specifically so it only had one loop, because it felt pretty awful to me and something just didn't feel right that we had to do characters in combat loop and a monsters in combat loop when really they all boil down to units for the most part. So I've changed it so that we no longer have characters in combats and monsters in combat, and instead we just have a single unit array. And most of this logic can now be figured out by getting components because our pieces are mainly made of a bunch of mono behaviors. I'm just gonna crank the music down ever so slightly. All right, so we can get those components off of our unit because they're all in the same location. So here, if we want to get the alliance, we can just have one base array of units, get the alliance, using that alliance to determine whether or not enemies or characters have won. Moving on. So what did we do inside of Character Combat Manager? If you've never seen a Perforce or a diff change tool before, quickly, the stuff on the left is what we had before, the stuff on the right is what I have now, essentially. So we used to have this idea of characters in combats and monsters in combats, and I'm not going to break down all of this, but we now have more of the idea of units and unit ATBs, which I'll get into. And then we have monster or model loaders, which essentially kind of takes the place of character models. Broad scopes, we basically, instead of having a character model initialize the character model, we now have a model loader initialize the character model, and the model loader also initializes the monster models. So if we take a look, yeah, I mean, that's most of the stuff I'll come back to, but I just want to start at that broad statement. And so inside of, let's take a look actually in code. Let's jump over into Visual Studio and let's take a look at the character model. So character model used to have this concept of it basically handled multiple different functions, because we built all this stuff when we were initially getting all of this prototype work off the ground very quickly in stream, and so this thing kind of ended up tacking on more and more functionality that it really didn't need. So character model really is supposed to be about getting the design data and initializing the prefab via addressables. So this class is primarily about getting it so that when we hit play, Oh, I didn't import all the scripts. Hopefully there's no errors. Everything should be okay though. But when we load into the game, which I'm going to get running mostly so that I can point to a couple different pieces so that we have examples. Maybe possibly. Okay, so these character models here are being loaded in via this addressable call. And that's really all we need this class to do, but it also handles the action bar progress, its max progress, the initiative of the character, whether or not a character is ready to attack. And this doesn't make a ton of sense. So if we look at the new class, which is the model loader, it now handles just loading. So it takes in the data, it initializes the character prefab. It does it slightly differently, whether it's monster design data or character design data, but at the end of the day, it creates a unit or a monster. And these really just boil down to basically generating a unit, and that unit then gets added to the combat character manager's units, and then there's an ATB class now, which gets you to add it to the unit ATBs. I'd like to maybe make this one. I don't know if I really like how I have to add both of them. I could really fetch one or the other, but for now this is working. So there might be a little bit more change that could still be done here. So we have this thing now handling just creating the models. So taking the functionality that was here inside of character model and boiling it down to just the model creation. As for the AB current max initiative ready, all of that stuff has been put into an ATB class. So in the same way that we have a unit class, an alliance class, a stats class, and all of these things are just components that sit on top of our characters. So if we jump into the game and we take a look at the knight has health, mana, stats, alliances. It now also has this ATB script. And the ATB script is now handling all the same functionality that used to be handled in character model, but now is kind of being handled on the individual units instead of in this other class that's kind of just in the ether. And this fits our design pattern that we're following from Liquid Fire blogs a lot better. Everything is a component, and this means that going forward, if we ever have a status that like freezes your ATB, we can have that be affected in here by getting statuses and then checking for a specific status. And that's if that's freeze status is set, then we won't update the current ATB based off delta time times the speed stat. This is also another small thing I'll point out, is that we used to do just initiative, which was just a random value that we were getting in from the design data. It makes more sense to instead have this be the speed stat from the stats component. So slowly consolidating everything to be more one type. Okay, so that's the ATB stuff. Let's jump over back to inside of the change list. So now inside of the unit factory, we can see that when we add the unit, we instead call it add unit function, and we add the ATB. And the ATB is for the most part just initializing the ATB component. And then for the add unit, there were some values that used to exist. Jumping back over here, going back into the character model. Aside from ATB, this thing also used to contain an ID for referencing which character was currently being selected, having a display name, as well as referencing the list of ability IDs which we would use to generate the menu. All of that data has now been changed instead to be based off of the unit class. And whether or not that makes sense, I think is somewhat debatable. I think that, again, maybe unit shouldn't have this stuff. Maybe there should be an ability ID class that's also a mono behavior that exists on top of our unit, just so that we can differentiate and separate things a little bit cleanly. But for now, we're basically taking anything that used to be in character model, because we're trying to get rid of character model entirely, and we're sticking that inside of the unit. Now inside of the init UI, before we used to have to do characters in combat and initialize the character infos with the characters in combat. Now instead we basically set up a list of heroes and enemies, and then we use those heroes and enemies to initialize the character info and the monster infos. Those infos now take in a unit instead of the class specific monster model or character model. So it used to be character model, now it's unit, and then it also has this ATB because this info view would show the progress bars filling for the characters. Now we just get the ATB component and reference AB progress that way rather than it being inside of this character model. Again, just trying to remove character model as much as possible, break it out into several different pieces that make more sense to control each of those elements rather than it being one big class that controls everything. Then inside of the state machine, we had to change it to be a current unit instead of current character model. Current unit inside of the state, which was referencing the UI state manager's current model. Again, we're mostly just renaming things to be using units and renaming it to be more clear. But this actually ended up having a pretty big impact. So again, renaming things. So instead of getting the current active character from the character combat manager, which we would determine and set based off whichever character was currently ready, now we get the unit ATB to determine if it's ready and set the current unit as ready to act. And the really big thing about this change is it used to be that because this was based off current active character specifically, and I didn't see this coming, I realized that we were kind of hard coding ourselves into current active character being specifically a character model. So as we work towards getting enemies to be attacking and fighting in the combat, we were going to run into a huge issue where the whole state machine we built wouldn't work with character or with enemies being attackers because we were specifically looking for the current active character. But now the changes we've made says we're looking for the current active unit. And even inside of the combat character manager, we're still looking at all of the units ATBs, which now means that monsters can have ATBs as well. Action bars, action time bars. So units can now perform actions if their ATBs fill. We still have to figure out the AI on that, but it can now get slotted into waiting for current character UI state. This would probably be renamed to current unit, but for now it's fine. And then each of these pieces, instead of getting a very specific get target monster model or get character model, we instead just get unit animator. And again, this is more of an efficiency, is it just makes sense to grab the unit animator because we get the animator. It used to be that when we would do this, we would get the monster model and get the prefab, and the prefab was an animator stored inside of the character model or in the monster model or inside of the character model. But now we just get unit animator, which is just skipping this one extra little bit of information because this function's giving back exactly what we're expecting. Doing that all over the place, basically for every one of our states. We used to be very specific about characters are attacking, so characters will enter into certain states. Now it's all generically just units. We don't care if it's a monster or a character, it's just units that we're getting their animator and setting them into specific animation states. This does mean that the animation names, like relax, will have to be the same across monsters and characters. I may have to look at some of our model data and make sure that's consistent. And then here we're setting up the main action bar. Again, instead of getting the current active character and then getting the ability IDs, now we're just getting the current active unit and getting its ability IDs. That was a lot of talking. I don't know if this made any sense or if anyone's gotten to this point. I'm more talking towards the archive, but this was like 15 minutes of just straight code review and just talking about the refactors. Way more condensed, way more directed than what I normally do. Normally we just stream, ramble, and build. But again, for something like this, I think it makes more sense for a refactor to figure it out cleanly and then maybe show you guys the changes that we made. So that was the changes. There is one last thing that I'd probably like to do on the refactor side of things. And I thought this would be a nice point to jump in, show what we've done. And now I want to break down one more refactor that I've kind of planned out, and I kind of want to just show a little bit of the process of changing code around. This one's a lot more condensed than some of what I've just shown. But let's first get I can't get rid of you. Oh, I see what the problem is. let's fix the display, because the display is off slightly. Sorry, 1 second. Everything's falling apart. There we go. Okay, and then we can locate this here. And the black screen of death is over. So now we can dig into this. So first thing I want to do, now that we've kind of shown all that and I had some of these files left for reference, I'd like to go in and remove some of the scripts we no longer need. So let's clean that up. And then while I'm doing that, let's talk about the next step. One thing I've noticed while modifying all of this stuff so that there wasn't characters and monsters, but really just units in the game, is I found that the character combat manager class is still a little bloated. In the same way that character model was handling loading models as well as handling the ATB bars filling, the character combat manager is kind of handling a couple different functions itself. And it could be broken down into something a little bit cleaner. So let's get rid of character model and monster model. We no longer need these because of all the refactoring we've done. And now let's take a look at combat character model. So this guy, really handles 2 functions. It actually handles a couple smaller ones, like it's got this UI related rect in here, rect transform, which is being used by our damage effect listener. So this is the actual text that flies off when we hit a guy and deal damage. This doesn't make a ton of sense to be in here. I feel like maybe this is because these are prefabs that are being generated. We have a pool managing system, and so it doesn't really have a good place of grabbing this reference. I feel like there should maybe be a UI manager. That change we can leave for now. The one that feels a little bit more problematic to me is this class kind of handles the spawning logic. So it handles the spawning locations and it handles the model loading, but it also handles the spawned characters ATB kind of progress as well as the victory condition. And that feels a little weird to me. Like, yes, it controls the units and it's kind of spawning the units, but these could be broken up into 2 different managers. There can be a manager for basically spawns and then a manager for ATB logic. I think that's the primary thing I want to change here. So I want to change combat character manager to get rid of the loading. I think that's the easier way to do this. And I think I want to instead have a character loading manager. Let's copy this. Duplicate. Visual Studio is going to reopen itself, but first I want to rename this file. So instead of combat character manager, we're going to have character loading manager. We're going to copy that name as well, because now when we load up this file, we are going to rename it. And we're going to remove all the stuff related to, okay, we're in the right file, character loading manager, good. It's a singleton, it will act the same way, but it's not going to have any of the spawned unit data. It's not going to have any data about the base victory. It's not going to have this. So it's not going to need any of these victory condition related functions. We really just want to boil it down to the loading. So we're going to get rid of this apply. We're going to have this init coroutine. We're going to get rid of all of this logic as well, because this is all related to the combat specifically. We're going to get rid of get ATB progress, is character ready, perform action, character is ready, and I believe we can get rid of all the unit references too, because it's not going to hold any of that. And it doesn't need this update anymore, which probably means it doesn't need this initialize. Is this initialize being used anywhere? It's being set to true, and that's it, so no. Where does this get init called? Well, nowhere, because this is the new version. So the old one was getting called init here on init all data. Okay. And it was kind of blocking itself from updating until it was initialized. And that initialization was basically saying load all of the characters. So let's remove the stuff that's character loading related in here. So we can kill all of this. And this is all is loading. This is about the spawns and the model loaders. And I believe that should be all the stuff related. Okay. So now this class essentially can be in charge of the initialization. Does this thing still need to use an init coroutine? I think it does. This guy definitely does. So I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's just the character model needs to be initted. So I could add initialization back in here, and then we could have a wait for character loading manager to be initted. Or I think we could just call the init coroutine ourselves and then yield. I think it's just yield. Does not like that. Did we do our instances as functions? Is that what it's complaining about? What is your complaint? Access singleton instance through this property. How do we normally reference in this project? It's normally just .instance. Not accessible due to its protection level. So let's make this a public function. Okay, can we now yield return? Okay, so the way this should work now is that it should call this function and it should hit all of its wait fors internally, and then once they're all done, it will be complete. Don't think we need this yield return null at the end. And then we set initialize to true. So the same functionality should happen. I don't think this apply condition needs to be in here. I think it can be above. It doesn't need to be inside the coroutine. We'll make the coroutine as simple as possible. And then we'll also pull the coroutine up so it's closer to this initialization function. I do feel like the victory conditions could potentially be separated out into its own logic as well, because this is basically just checking is battle over, so we could have a victory manager as well. I'm just trying to think about how do we simplify this code as much as possible so that moving forward we have a much cleaner base to work with. And I'm sure we'll clutter it up again as I come up with more and more ridiculous ways of tacking data that shouldn't exist in functions inside of other functions. But this just seems cleaner. Like now this character loading manager, it's very clear what this thing does. It has references to some spawn locations, which we're going to need to rehook up when we add this to the scene. And then it has basically some logic that revolves around actually loading things into those spawn locations. This also makes it cleaner because one of the next tasks we have is around making it so that there's a team manager and encounter design data for loading these pieces. And now these pieces are very much separated into their own special class. I think I will also make a victory manager as well, just to clean this up even further. And we might even just make a UI manager. This does mean that more pieces are spread out across multiple classes, which can be a little confusing, but as long as you know what those classes are and they're all reasonably found, I feel like we're okay. So no errors. Let's do the victory breakout as well while we're here. So we're going to duplicate this again. And we're going to name this Victory Manager, which is going to be in charge of verifying if we've ever reached a victory. Okay, copy the name. Come into here, rename this victory, rename this victory. It's not going to need any of the ATB related unit stuff. It's not going to need any of these functions, any of these calls. Perform action, get is ready, get animators. None of this stuff is needed for this class. This class is primarily just making sure that initialization is true, which I don't think it even needs to handle. Interesting. Who updates this Victor? This gets updated just by the condition. We might not want to be calling any of these pieces until initialization is true. So what we can do is we can say that we are not initialized until the base condition is added. Right, because we won't have a base condition to check against, so this will be null. So we could do something very simple where we just say, hey, if this is not equal null and battle is over, then we transition. It's a little less readable, but I think it's fine. We also don't need this in here. So now the victory manager is going to come in here. If we haven't applied a victory condition yet, it'll be null and it won't come in here. Otherwise, we'll check if the battle's over, and if the battle's over, we'll transition out. Very simple manager, just handling the transition out of this scene based off the victory condition. This thing can also be expanded upon later to also handle like showing some special UI for you've won, how much money you've earned, any rewards, any experience gained. This thing could eventually handle that, and now it's going to be in its own spot. It's much cleaner, much smaller, and easier to work with. Okay. The one last piece of this is we're going to need to apply this. So Combat Character Manager can still do that. Funnily enough, I think I do want to wait until the characters are initialized before we apply the victory condition now, so we will add it inside of this coroutine. Victory manager.instance.add victory condition, or yeah, add victory condition. So once we've initialized, then we'll add our victory condition, and then we'll say we're initialized. Now, this guy no longer needs any of the victory condition stuff, because it's all being handled by that new class we've created. So it doesn't need is battle over, and that should be it. So now this class's only function is to manage holding the units for any of the state machine stuff that needs references to these guys, for grabbing the units menu ID or ability IDs to build their selection menus, or showing their display names or any other UI related information. That's currently handled inside of this function there, or basically either being grabbed directly via this variable or through these functions. We might want to make this private so that if you want to grab units, it has to come through here via character ID. It's fine. This is working fine for now. So this class is now reduced. The last piece that doesn't make any sense in here is having this rect transform referenced here. I'm going to let that slide for the time being because I don't have anything else in terms of having a manager that would fit. Okay. So now we have to add these new managers to the scene. So we're going to have a character loading manager. Let's bring this out slightly so we can see. And then we're going to have a victory manager. Now the victory manager isn't going to need any other information. In fact, we can hide and inspector this variable because this variable will be handled privately. We don't need to set it in editor. So we're just going to hide that value. Now, as for the character loading manager, this guy will need to have references hooked up for the spawns. Same thing with the model loaders though. Those don't need to be shown because those are generated. So character loading manager, we can hide in inspector this value. So it's less confusing as we add stuff. So the only thing we need to worry about are these spawns. Which I may have made the mistake of deleting the variables that were related to spawns a little too early because now I have to go track them down again. Although I think they were just these. So let's try that. I believe it should be these 4 values. Let's lock the inspector so it doesn't change as we click on other values. And let's drop those 4 in and these 3 in. And those should be all the viable spawns. And if we've refactored this properly, it should just load. It's kind of always the baseline, is just checking to see whether or not it actually works. Looks like it is. We will notice that the ATB bars of all of these are now moving at the exact same speed, whereas in part 13 they used to move at different speeds. That's because they're all using the same default speed value, because we've changed it from being the initiative that we read in from design data to just being the default speed. Which leads us into our next point. So I'm pretty happy with that refactor. That was kind of the last big thing, or not big thing, but the last thing I'd like to do, and I thought I would like to do it on stream. That only took a few minutes, maybe 10-15 minutes, to break up this combat character manager into a victory manager and a character loading manager. So the next piece of the puzzle that I think I'd like to tackle well, I'd like to get characters loading off of a team manager, and I'd like to get enemies loading off of a zone encounter data, so that basically what loads in is not hard-coded every time, but like if I go to town and we add UI elements to swap out our teammates, the teammates should be based off of what your current team is. That should be static. It should exist between battles and should be updated between battles. So then we'll need a team manager for that. Right now, what's happening is we're just loading in this data exactly, and that's it. So this is kind of a bigger thing, and I don't have a lot more time today because I spent a fair amount of the time, like I said, kind of doing some stuff off camera before starting the stream. So I think a somewhat smaller thing that we can get started on is importing stats from design data. I just want to start wrapping my head around what exactly is involved in this. So we know that our characters currently have a stats class. And that stats class, or a stats component, they have a component attached to each of them, and it contains a series of stats listed here. So they have level, experience, HP, MP, or max MP, sorry, HP, max HP, MP, max MP, etc., etc., etc. We may want to change what some of these are, but let's start with something simple. Let's get the speed value that we used to have for each character, which was defined as this value here. We were reading it into an initiative value, but it was always really speed. Let's get this value coming in from the design data to go into the stats class here. Let's start with that as the most basic concept. So let's take a look at the unit factory. So at this point, it has the design data. So if we look at character design data, it has an initiative value. Poorly named, but it's fine. And then we have our stats. And these stats get defaulted here. So I mean, the simplest thing we can do is quite literally int, or not int here, but speed. It's not even speed. It's data dot initiative. This value can come into here as int speed. This is a float value. That's fine, we can make that change. My mind is frying. All right, so we give 0 speed to the enemies so that they don't do anything right now. I'm kind of curious, though, why they're not getting an action. Because technically they're all units now. So the enemies, I'm going to worry about it in a bit. For now, let's just set them to have a small speed or 0 speed so that we don't have to worry about them ever causing any issues until we figure out how they're going to act. This is taking in an int value though. Okay, so what it really boils down to then is that we want our values to be integers. This needs to be an integer. This is coming in from the design data, which does an int parse anyways, so I don't know why it was a float. Bad naming, or bad variable definitions. So at a base level, this should just work. We shouldn't have to re-import anything. We should just be getting in the data for the characters. So we should see the ATB bars moving faster. String 15.0 is not a valid integer. Does not look like a 0.0 there. And it is an int parse. Breakpoint time. Let's try and figure out why our parser is being weird. I was hoping this would be quick, but regardless of bugs, this isn't going to obviously be the best way to do it because, well, there's many reasons. Number one, the most simple reason is that if we had to add every single stat as a value in this way, it's going to be somewhat cumbersome. We may end up having to do it that way anyways, where inside of Unit Factory we pass in each value that we get from the data. It just doesn't feel great to have this. I feel like it should be passing in like a one-to-one reference list, like a map or a dictionary. Regardless, the second problem of just how many variables we'll have to pass into this function is that ideally the attack value shouldn't be static. So right now the attack value or the speed values that are coming in here are just, I'm saying the knight's attack is 7. But ideally in a JRPG, growth and progression is a big part of it. So we're going to want to have it so that they actually have a level value, and that these values here are not necessarily what the stat is, but potentially how much growth we see in a certain stat. So the archer might have a higher speed growth, and every time they level up they might get a little bit more speed than, say, the wizard. So these stats will need to be more modifiers, not the exact stat that we're receiving. Okay, so I think we're attached. String input 15.0. Why does it think that that value is 15.0? It's just 15 here. That being said, we haven't re-imported the data. Interesting. It's not getting to my breakpoint because it's before we even parse. Interesting. I see. Well, at least I'm getting there. Sorry. Let me think about this. So the problem is that we're reading in a JSON file, and that JSON file has 15.0 in it, but we're expecting it to be 15. And the file it's complaining about is around our design data. So let's close up as much of this as possible, and then we'll take a look in here. So we're right. Okay. So when we parse, the code I had a breakpoint on, sorry, it's been a little while since I've looked at this code. So this is kind of the reason I wanted to just start with just getting one stat in, though, because it just reaffirms or reminds me of where we were. So when we run this code is not run when we run the game. This is a special logic parser that we run. So we can say run character parser. And character parser will convert integer into, will convert the string form of, converts this data in a specific format into a class that we then read into the game. Because it takes a bit of effort, or a fair amount of effort, to convert the spreadsheet form into a usable class. So we do that not at runtime, but at production time. We do it before the game is running. Okay, let's get out of here. So we basically, because we changed an initiative to be a integer instead of a float, it was now confused because it used to be set, yes to all. It used to be set as 0.0 when it would read it out here. But when we re-export or recreate these files, they get recreated as integers now. So by changing the variable, we just need to reparse. That was the long and short of that bug. Something extremely simple, but again, it's been a little while since I've worked with the parsing system. Okay, so now we're going to stop debugging because we're going to hit a bunch of breakpoints that apparently I haven't cleaned up. And now we're seeing these progress bars move at slightly different speeds. And if I look correctly, 18, 15, 13. And we're seeing that the barbarian and the archer went first, and the wizard is trailing behind the knight. So all of that is looking to be working. So that's importing data from the spreadsheet. So really, to get the stats set, we just need to make sure that we're passing in whatever design data we need from the spreadsheet down into this stats function. That's really all it boils down to. Okay. Pretty straightforward. Now, for monsters probably aren't going to level up unless we decide to have scaling monsters, like something in Oblivion where the monsters have base stats, but based off your level or average level, we scale the monsters up or down. We might get to something like that. But for now, I think the monsters literally can just get their stats directly from the spreadsheet. So if we do monster tab, currently the monsters have no stats. They also have no abilities. It's also kind of a problem. What happens if we give, let's say, each monster one ability, which is attack? Can we read that in? And can we give each monster a speed value, which is, for now, we can say 17, 17, 17. So they should go after the characters who have 18. Let's make this change. So let's download this as a TSV, I believe is what we were saving these as. See if I can find the right directory. Assets. Here, TSVs. So let's save over the old monster TSV. Replace. And then let's update the monster design data to reflect this new information. So it's going to need monster design data. Oh, it already had an ability IDs. Interesting. So it just needs initiative. And then take a look at where this gets modified inside of monster parser. Let's pin this and let's grab character parser because it's going to be the exact same logic. This one. So we need initiative. Which name was element 1, or sorry, ID was element 0, name was element 1, prefab was element 2. Did we really name this thing Monster A Prefab? That seems like a mistake. 0, 1, 2. So speed, initiative will be 3. In fact, I'm going to start naming these things correctly, so we'll call this actually speed. Okay, and then for the abilities, we're going to need this same logic. So we're going to grab the ability count from 4, because that's the next part of the column. And then we're going to create a new list of ability IDs inside of monsters. Then we're going to do monsters ability IDs, add animator string hash to value 5, because 5 was the next index after 4. Some of the string parsing stuff can get super confusing, I know, but here we go. Shouldn't use magic numbers. There should be a value that we set here. Starting index equals 5. Could have a more specific name, but this is at least better than having 5 everywhere. So then 5 plus j, which will be 0. We grab the name, make it an ability ID. And then this is debug log for when we parse so that we can see what we get. Okay. So now every monster should have attack as a base ability. right. Actually, I'm not running the game for this. I'm parsing the data. So we go to the tools, monster parser, parse, and it looks like it parsed correctly. Each of them got attack. All right, and so then we look at the monster design data. Each of these have a new ability, which is attack, and they have a speed of 17. All right, so now with that being done, we should be able to go into the unit factory, and now we should have actual data inside of monster data for speed. Where does this all start again? Current active unit. Where is the wait state? Wait for character. Excellent. Okay, so now this checks to see if a character is ready to act. Monsters should have ATBs on them now because of all the refactoring we've done, and they should get ready for an action. And because the combat system doesn't care about monsters or enemies or monsters or characters anymore, it just cares about units, any unit should be getting updated and any unit should be able to be ready. Okay. So, all that being said, monsters should be able to act with some of this importing. So as a last simple thing, quote unquote simple, let's see if we can get monsters to attack us back. Because they should have actions. The main change we'll need to make is right now, once we have a current active unit, we go into ability select UI state. And this state sets up the menu and asks us to press a button on the ability to use. And then we go target selected UI state, given the ability ID of the ability we pressed. But here, if current unit dot get alliance, get component alliance is what's the actual call for this? Type equals alliances hero, then we should go into the state for selecting UI. Else, if it's not a hero, and to be very specific, because there are other types of alliances, but for the time being, we're really only using hero and enemy. If it's an enemy, then we should go into the target selected UI state. Now the trick will be getting the ability ID. So the ability ID comes from setting up the action menu, which grabs the current character's ability IDs. This is how we know what abilities to display, and then from those that are displayed, we can select one. So in the enemy monster state, the simplest version, if we can get back to wait for character, simplest version should be to get the IDs and for simplicity's sake, we can just do 0. I mean, there's an easy way to do this. We can do int selected ability equals ability.count or random range 0 to ability count. You want me to just use range? I can just use range, that's fine. And then use this value. Now the only question is whether this will be inclusive or exclusive. Inclusive, so it'll include 0, but exclusive, it'll exclude max. So basically it'll do 0, it'll do max minus 1 is what the exclusive means. So the count will be 1, minus 1 will be 0, so it'll give me a random range right now because we only have one ability of 0. But if we ever add more abilities to the monsters, it'll magically, or because we've set it up properly, just pick one of those abilities at random. Okay, cool. So now heroes should get UI states to select. Enemies should immediately act, choosing a random skill if they have one. Well, this kind of assumes they have an ability skill, which I think is a fine assumption. Like, we assume that our enemies have attacks. The game design data should have, every enemy should have at least one attack. That's a fine assumption to make, I think. So with all the refactoring we've done, this might just work. I doubt it, but it shouldn't be far off. Shouldn't be far off. In fact, if we go, as soon as, oh, did we run into a null reference? We did. Addressables issue. Invalid key exception. Interesting. Very interesting. We parse the monster data. Is somehow giving the monster's abilities causing our addressables to fail because it's trying to grab the ability to load onto the monster, but it's not working for them for some reason? Are you failing to load the monster data for some reason? Exception encountered in operation. Resource, complete operation, result, failed. Invalid key exception. Key 17. Monster prefab is being set to 17. We broke something with the parser. We changed the wrong value. We were trying to find a monster prefab named 17. Okay. So, monster parser. Run it. Should be able to click on this thing and see now they have proper names. We hit play. As long as we don't have any more stupid bugs. Well, they're not stupid. It's just small oversights. Okay, so it loads up. So now these guys should act first at 18. And as soon as we finish attacking, they should go at 17. Ideally, Cactus Man. So we have an attack. Does this mean that we're not initializing the alliances correctly? No, he is an enemy. Did we not save the script? Why are we getting UI? Wrong wait for. We're going into target select UI. That's technically not correct. That's part of the problem. This is the function call we should choose. I see. The monsters aren't going to select a target either. We should be handling that for them. This is a test function, apparently. Seems slightly weird. It used to be a test function, but it's kind of now just based in... It's kind of just based... Okay, so we have the ability selected. That still holds true. The difference now is that we need to select targets. And these targets is a list of IDs, technically. So how do we normally give the player options to select targets? On enter, we turn on the target buttons. And when the target button is pressed, we send what the unit ID is back through. And we can send multiple targets, obviously, but right now we only handle sending one. So the trick here is we need to get a list of heroes. Okay, so we need to do instance dot get, not get, but units for integer I equals 0, where I is less than the count of units. I feel like this should actually just be a function rather than writing this code. Like, the combat character manager should handle getting a random target. In fact, I'm gonna actually do that. As I talk aloud about it, I realize I just want to write this code. So int get random target. And then we're going to want to pass in an alliance the same way we do for victory conditions. I don't think I need to go find a reference. Alliance, the enum type. Alliances. Get random target. We're going to build a list of target IDs. I'm thinking about all kinds of problems we're going to run into here. Return int target index equals 0, so we're going to need an index, and then we'll do target ID at target index. Okay, this isn't a function. Then we're going to grab every unit Also, this is inside of Combat Manager now, so we don't need that. So we're going to grab every unit and we're going to check its alliances. Get component alliance. And we're going to check to see if that alliance is a kin dot type. If the target alliance type, just renaming things to be a little bit more clear, if the target alliance type is equal to this unit's type, then we add this unit's ID to the list of possible targets. ID? Is that what I'm looking for? Yes. And then we do a similar get range that we just wrote over here. So I'm just going to go grab it because it's faster than typing it out. Target index is equal to target ID count. There, we might want a system. So there's a couple other fails cases here. Technically, we shouldn't target units that are dead. And the way that we tell if something is dead is based off of a status, isn't it? How do we check for death? Knocked out status effect. Think there's a different way of doing this. Let's start with this. I don't think this is the right way to write this code. I'm gonna have to go look at some references inside of Liquid Fire blogs to see how we do status effect checking again, but in the time being, let's just leave it out and just leave a comment of it so that we remember that we have to come back and write this differently to handle death. But this will get us a random target. Sometimes the target might be dead, but if that bugs out, we can at least have something that's... We should at least be able to attack one time. So combat character manager dot instance get target, get random target. Technically I have to pass in alliance hero. Technically this is a list, so we have to do this and then targets dot add a random target, like so. Okay, so now we should have an ability ID set, we should have the attacker being set to the current unit, we should have targets being set. And that should be building a new ability sequence ID. The only trick will be whether or not we have a relaxed set for the enemies, and I don't think we do. We might have to make some of those changes. In fact, most of this will probably break on animation setting, because I don't think the two animation systems share the same animation flags. Okay. This started as something somewhat simple, and I feel like it has spiraled. We'll give it a little bit longer, though. I'd like to try and get something, at least if he can hit me one time. That would be cool. So we attack him by using our UI. We attack him with our UI. They should have queued an action. Oh, this is another thing we don't really have handled, do we? Huh. I'm going to hardcode change the enemies to go first just to see if we can have them hit. But I think the realization I've just had is that I think the Death Knight set up an attack, but then died. And we don't have any way of notifying, hey, I've died, please remove my action from the action queue. And that's a problem. It's not letting me open this file. Fine. Oh, that's because technically that's the CSV, which is a little confusing. Okay, let's give these guys a speed of 20. We'll just do the ghost. So we're going to change this without having to do a re-import. It's just faster. A little risky because it might get stomped, but we're not writing real design data at this point. We're more testing functionality. Okay, so the ghost should attack first. It gets stuck. And it gets stuck because the ghost doesn't have a attack. Yeah, so this is kind of what I was getting at. It kind of all fails out because of that. Interesting. I forgot that we've kind of hard-coded a lot of our attacking system directly into the animations. So when a character attacks, we go into that character's animation tree. What was the attack? Oh, I cleared it. Melee. Right. This is not a problem, it just requires more design setup. So it tries to go into a relaxed state, which is supposed to be like a basic attack or basic idle, and then it tries to do melee right attack 1. But the ghost's animation set just has bite attack, cast attack, surround attack, defend, take damage, die, spawn. It has all of these. So in this situation, I probably wanted to use one of these animation names, and these animation names are going to need to come in from the ability. Right. Right, that's the whole system I built. I built these. So the problem is really that this is coming in from here, and it shouldn't be. Or I'm using the most basic attack, which these enemy models need their own ability for attack. So let's say that we'll call it bite attack. If I can maybe rename. You gonna... Oh, here we go. Okay, bite attack. Let's say that there's a new ability, and the ability is ghost attack. See, at least I wrote this code in such a way that it is kind of working. I do wonder if we might want to have a separate section for monster attacks, because this feels a bit overkill that we're going to have to make an attack ability for every monster in the game, but I mean, that's just kind of it. I might want to separate out into its own sheet just for readability. So maybe we have an ability tab for characters and an ability tab for monsters, but they all get subcategorized into one ability list inside of the game. But for design, we just show it as two separate lists, so it's a little bit more easy to read. Okay, so we should have a ghost attack. We now want the monster to use the ghost attack. All the other monsters will fail right now because we haven't set anything up for them, but let's just try this. Let's do save over the monster TSV. And then we also need to save over the ability TSV. Then we re-import both so that we have this new data. Stop the game too. Re-import monsters, that seems to work fine. Re-import abilities. There's a ghost attack ability now, which is 508 blah blah 72 and 5008 blah 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 72. Okay, so it looks like it has the right ID. All right, good. The last piece here would be ghost attack or bite attack. This thing is gonna need a animation trigger because our system works off of animation triggers. So if we go to melee right attack 01, and we look at events, this thing has an event eventually, which is just called process event, and it doesn't pass in any information. Okay, so we need to do the same thing on the ghost bite. So bite attack is here. We click on here. We add an event. We add it somewhere where it makes sense, ideally. Right there, probably. And this will trigger the damage effect stuff to go off. Okay, so we're adding an event to say, hey, this is when we want the game to play the damage effect or the character get hit effect. So we've added an event to the ghost's animation. So now the ghost should bite, should play an attack. Maybe. Well, what went wrong this time? Oh, I know what went wrong this time. It's the exact thing I said that was somewhat risky. We re-imported the data, which means we stomped the 20 speed that we modified in here. So the ghost didn't go first anymore, because he wasn't faster than the characters. So the way to make sure we don't accidentally do that again is that we just modify that inside of monsters as well, so that when we re-import all our data again, it doesn't break. And we missed whatever happened, and it looked like it broke again. Now, the break is probably... Bite attack does not exist. Really, game? It's because there's a space. So the name of the animation... Oh, now you let me select it. Okay, so there's a space in there. So we call this ability bite attack. We don't need to re-export the other one. We just need to re-export this one because the name ID hasn't changed. It's still ghost attack. Abilities. Save over. We shouldn't be stomping anything by re-importing the abilities. We parse. It comes in. Still has the right ID for ghost attack. We hit play. Now it should find the right animation name to play with this attack. I do wonder if the hit animation name will be right for characters. Interesting. There was no receiver on the ghost for the actual animation event. That is probably a Unity factory problem. We add to monsters... Oh, we do add an event receiver to both. So why would the ghost have not had... This is more just working through our own animation system, which I haven't touched in a while. Oh, it didn't save. That's not right. What is the function name that we're trying to call inside of here? That's what we're actually doing, is we're calling this function with a string parameter, which is empty most of the time. Somewhere around there. Yeah, about there. Okay, so let's click away and then click back. Looks like the event saved that time. I'm not sure why that didn't save the first time. We're working through it. We're getting there. Okay, so he attacks. And he hits. I mean, it worked. It's kind of what we've been working at for the past 15-20 minutes now. He did do 0 damage. Whereas when we attack, we do 5. There's a number of reasons for that. Most likely, we go into debug view so that we can see the stats values. He should have reasonable stats. Interesting. A couple things I can think of. First thought is, did we hook up players to have a damage event fly off of them? It's highly possible that the ghost is damaging, but there's no effect to let us know. It's possible. So he hit the wizard, and the wizard's health looks to still be the same. I think we also have a health stat. Interesting. Well, regardless, still progress. Even if we're not damaging the heroes, we're still making progress. One thing we could do very, very quickly to help us with debugging this a little bit is there is the character info view. This shows the character name and the character fill bar, which is this hard-coded information on the bottom, which is not great. Character info panel, character infos. This has the ATB. It has the hero name, but we don't reference the HP by default right now. That's kind of a shame that we have to add this. HP. We should be able to very easily hook this up. HP. Just setting each of these to the appropriate text value. Just double checking to make sure that it's the one inside of itself. It's not setting someone else's HP value. Okay, so now they each have a reference to the HP's text. So we should be able to go in here now, and we should be able to modify that on update to be e text is equal to could have the character info save the stats component for its related referenced character. When it gets initialized. And then we can set the HP to be stats HP and stats max HP. Now every character should have their current HP actually being shown, and we should be able to see if that stat is changing when an enemy attacks them. Interesting. They each have 1 health and 1 max health. X-Minion Sniper asks what a JRPG is, but has heard of an RPG before. JRPG is a Japanese RPG. It's kind of an older term for like the old Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy 4 and 6. It's kind of the ones that come near and dear to my heart. Let's see. So why do you guys only have 1 health and 1 max HP? That seems wrong. But it's likely that we are setting up the heroes. Yeah, I mean, technically we set them up with... Oh, that's because we hard-code everyone. Because we set up the enemies to only have 1. So that they die in 1 hit in order to test the deaths. That's what we did. Okay. That's why they have 1 of 1. But still, so then the enemy's attack isn't doing any damage then. So we gotta figure out why he attacks, the animation goes off, but he applies no damage. Now it's possible the enemies have 0 attack, but they all get set to the same values. Even if it was 0, I would still expect a damage effect to fly off at that moment. In the same way that when we attack the monsters, a damage effect goes off. Now, they both have damage effect listeners. Let's take a look at what this does. This is listening for an on-hit effect. Damage effect name. Hit data gets called. So when a base ability effect hits, roll for hit, apply hit, we send out this notification. So we should be able to put a breakpoint here and see what's happening when the hit effect is heard by the damage effect listener. So when this thing hears that the player has been hit, what is it doing? Well, we have other breakpoints we need to get rid of. Okay. So the ghost is going to go. He's going to perform an attack. That attack is going to hit. And we did not get a message. We did not break on the hit effect. Interesting. And if we check on the characters, they do have a damage effect listener. Weirdly set up damage effect listener, but they have one. Is it also weirdly set up like that for the ghost? It is. Okay, so it's probably fine. Oh, right, we have misses in our system. So it's possible the ghost stats are set up in such a way that he's always missing. But it still looks like we should get an on-hit call. Either way, we should call hit. And our design data said that this is an attack. So this ability should also be a basic effect. So it should be applying this. Well, alright. Well, let's keep trying to hit breakpoints and see if we can find a spot where our code is broken. It's a little weird. But to be fair, we built everything around the characters hitting enemies, and we never really thought about at all how the enemies would hit us. Still no. Alright, well, let's take a look at the other side of this. So the characters are being controlled by animation events. So we know that we set up the animation listener. And this thing posts an animation event. And that gets heard by... So this is when the bite effect, when that trigger happens, it sends out a notification, and that gets listened by the knockout effect and by the play animation state. So this thing hears that we've resolved, we've hit the animation, and then we go to the resolve effect ability state. And this thing is what is setting target damage. Okay, this is the class that we need to listen to, because there's no way this isn't being hit. Because all the characters are animating. Okay, so we enter into the attack state. The ghost performs an attack. Once he gets to the bite part, we hit this code. All right. So we set the take damage, which is not going to be found, but that's fine. We play an attack particle. Okay. Current ability sequence attacker. We grab the abilities and then search the abilities to find an ability that has the same name. The enemies have no abilities. That's why this isn't working. So when we add abilities, is that something we only do for characters and not monsters? It is, because we didn't have abilities on monsters originally. And so because they don't have any abilities on them, it has nothing to go grab to actually perform the attack with. Because the code I wrote, or the design data I wrote to say, hey, this is the attack animation to play, isn't the same as the code that actually performs the attack. They're two slightly separate things that both get generated off the same design data. But we never assigned any of the actual abilities to the character, meaning we can't find an ability to perform, so we don't actually perform it as part of the animation. The animation and the abilities are separate. So we did 6 damage to him, and he's now at 44 of 50. We've done it. We've had an enemy attack us. Somewhat counterproductive if we were playing the game, but we're not. We're making the game, so yes, enemies can hit us. So now we can attack back and forth. They're going to take damage. This guy's going to fail because he doesn't have a proper attack. The solution to that is to set up the attacks for every other enemy. The other solution would be to set up encounter zone data, because if we could load an encounter instead of right now, I think what we're doing is we're literally just instantiating everything in this list. If instead we had zone data or encounter data that said you fight 1 cactus orange or 2 ghosts blue, then we could have you fight these monsters, and then we wouldn't have to worry about setting anyone else up, because there'd only be 2 ghost blue models. Cool. Let's say for now, just to end this out, we're going to just set up the attacks for everyone else. And then we're going to call it a day, I think. Ooh, which attack do we want to use? Power punch attack sounds cool. So it doesn't look like it lets me rename while the game is running is the problem. So if we go monsters, each of these are going to need their own, so we're just going to name them the name of the character for now. So this will be Cactus Attack. This will be Death Knight Attack. We're going to have there be 2 new abilities. Those abilities will be Cactus Attack and Death Knight Attack. Now we just need to set up the name, so it's Power Punch Attack, all capitals on each of the names, or each of the words. Power Punch Attack. And then for the Death Knight, here he is. Ooh, he also has a bunch of attacks. Double attack sounds fun. Yeah, double attack with a space. Double attack. Okay. So now we're going to have to download TSV for the abilities. File, download TSV for the monsters. Stop the game. Parse monsters. Looks successful. Parse abilities. Just looking down here to see what it does. Yep, that all looks fine. Let's run it. And now we should be able to have a punching match where we punch back and forth. Interesting. It broke when the Death Knight attacked. Ah, because the Death Knight didn't have his animation set up. So we're gonna have to find the toon monsters. We want it double attack. Switch back to normal, double click. Events. Honestly, this is one that I feel like would be a candidate for trying to figure out how to do two animation triggers. Be pretty awesome if this thing had like 2 damage events that happened. Okay, that's stuck. And then the cactus monster. Looks like we want powerful punch, I think is what we got. About there. Didn't stick. Interesting. Doesn't seem to save the value the first time, but it does the second. Alright, that should be fixed now though. So everyone should be punching back and forth, hopefully, finally. But yeah, the Death Knight with the double attack, it'd be interesting if we could find a way to have it trigger 2 attack effects, like 1-2, because he attacks twice. Not necessary in any way. Honestly, a weird diversion. Kind of a neat idea, but not necessary. Now we're fighting. Look at us go. There might be something too where we might want to have it so that the actually I kind of like the double slash and then it only does damage on the last one. I feel like in Final Fantasy VI, if I just sit here on the attack screen, the enemies will still keep attacking me. Like right now it pauses ATB growth for everyone. But there could be a situation in which we try having it so ATB is always running. There is no pause. I'm going to drop everyone's health back down to 5. I just want to see if how deaths break everything. Because I imagine enemies will start targeting people who are already dead with their attacks because we still don't have that code in. Could be interesting. I think it'll probably still try and do the damage effect. I don't know. It might pop them back to life because their animation will go from a death animation. Oh, they don't fade through the ground, though. We don't have that logic hooked up to them like we do for monsters. Yeah, even though the archer's dead, the archer can still attack. Yeah, and one of the enemies attacked the wizard even though the wizard was dead. Okay, so there's some really weird stuff with death and enemies, and yeah, we need to do some logic around knockout status effect and making sure the game doesn't continue to run even after knockout status effect has happened. Also, I never realized it, but we can still target characters that are dead too. Those are all fairly big issues. Cool. I think that's going to do it for today, though. I think that we're going to probably come back next time and try and tackle... Honestly, trying to get encounters into the game would be good. Set up a new set of design data for encounters. Then when we load into combat, instead of just loading in the 3 monsters that are in the database, load up an encounter, and the encounter will determine which monsters in the database to load. I think that's a pretty big step. And then the next big step after that is, instead of just loading up the characters in the database, have a team manager that persists between battle and keep track of level experience, gaining experience, leveling up, and having the stats read in from this design data that are determined, not straight like this is your attack value, but to some sort of value that is used to determine your attack value at specific levels. Yeah, so encounter manager next, and team manager, so that we can kind of have consistent leveling up and progression with our team. And then hopefully I have some ideas for how to make combat a little bit more unique and something different. And we'll probably start playing with some of those ideas once we have the encounters and the team manager. Because once we have progression and fighting random enemy groupings, then we can start playing with like special abilities and combos, and there's some stuff I want to trying to do some unique combat with this combat system. For now though, this is going to be, well, I'll say at the very end here, the beginning of the first 15 minutes of this video were very hardcore, very quickly like, hey, this is the Refactor. If you got all the way through this video, hopefully you enjoyed it, but let me know if you liked that first part, if you liked the progression of everything else we've done. What do you like, not like about these videos? I've seen some people comment that they really like them. Just which aspects you're enjoying. I'm enjoying building this, but any feedback on which parts you'd like to see more or less of would be helpful. For now though, this is going to be Tolhi signing out. Later guys.